हाँ फिर आए। आपने बड़ा सवाल किया फिर। أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي كان موجودا قبل حدوث الأشياء ويبقى بعد فناء الأشياء تفرد بالأولية والقدم وسمى كل شيء ما عداه بالفناء والعدم كما قال عز شأنه كل شيء هالك إلا وجهه كل نفس ذائقة الموت وقال كل من عليها فاني ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام سبحان من لا يخفى عليه اختلاف النيات ولا يعزب عنه معاصي العباد في الخلوات سبحان الله الذي منه خلقة العباد وإليه المعاد فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره نشهد أن لا إله إلا هو الملك الذي لا ينازع في ملكه ولا يضاد في حكمه يعظم من يشاء بما يشاء كيف يشاء ويرحم من يشاء بما يشاء كيف يشاء تعذيبه المسيئين عدل وعفوه تفضل ونشهد أن محمدا سيد المرسلين وخير المبشرين والمنذرين صلى الله عليه وآله الهداة المهديين من ركب سفينة النجاة واهتدى ومن تخلف عنها ضل فغرقا وهوى أوصيكم عباد الله بالاعتصام بالتقوى فإنه حبل متين وأروة المصطفى قال أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب عليه الصلاة والسلام إن استصعبت عليه نفسه فيما تكره لم يعتقها سؤلها فيما تحب قرة عينه فيما لا يزول وزهادته فيما لا يبقى صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I advise myself and all of you to adopt the taqwa of Allah as is the best of provisions. The segment of Khutbah Muttaqeen that I recited focuses on an important concept of the elements of awakening. We live in a world, it's a fast moving pace world. And a lot of time when we get caught in the glamour of the world, we tend to fall into somber and forget what's real at stake in our surroundings. And therefore, it is important to have these elements of awakening always there for us to come back to the reality. A lot of time, a person loses the focus, starts flying where it does not see that with the higher you go, the stronger you will fall down and the distance will be greater. And therefore, it is important for us to keep these elements, just like a reality check, I don't know if you've been in a cockpit of an airplane. Before the flight is taken off, there are some checkpoints that they have to go over. Even though those things are very basic things that are done, they're rudimentary, but still they have to go through the process to make sure that everything is in check. And hence, this is the same way. In our lives, we need to make sure that those checkpoints are there on a daily basis because we tend to lose focus so quickly. One thing here or there, we go out of focus. And so a lot of times, that's why the obligation of 5 times prayer is there to bring us back to the markaz, bring us back to the focus, bring us back to that centralized position where sometimes we move away from. That's probably one of the reasons why it is stipulated 5 different times throughout the day. Someone would say, well, the 5 prayers take about 20 minutes. Why not just pray them all together? I'm sure some people still do that, citing some references saying that, oh, look, I don't have time at work and whatnot. So I end up combining all of my day's prayer, 17 rak'at. I can do that in 15, 20 minutes of time. So why can't we do that? Well, the reason behind it is that, every time in between these prayers, you lose focus, you're brought back and you come back to that centralized position. So with that said, we understand the concept of elements of awakening, that this awakening is something that has to be there in order for us to don't lose the focus. Another important event that is coming up is the historic meeting between the two highest authorities in the Muslim and the Christian world. And that is the meeting that is taking place, inshallah, tomorrow, God willing, between the highest authority in Madhab Tashayyu, which is Ayatollah Sistani, may Allah prolong his life, and the Pontiff, or the Pope of the Christian world, who is, of course, assumed the same caliber, if not more, because in the Christian world, the same sort of authority. So indeed, it is a very historical moment in the many of our lives. I don't recall any such meeting of that caliber taking place anywhere prior to this or in the recent history. In fact, if you go back a few hundred years, still you won't find that two top-notch authorities in their specific religions would come together like this. So while it may only be a 40-minute long meeting where Pope is supposed to arrive in Najaf and go straight to the house of Ayatollah Sistani and have this one-on-one meeting, Ayatollah Sistani usually, if those who have gone for the ziyarat and have visited Najaf, there is to see how Ayatollah Sistani's setup is. It's no different for anyone. It's the same setup for whether he's meeting dignitaries, whether he's meeting laymen. Therefore, whenever we have gone to see him, it's the same room where you get invited to, you go sit, and Ayatollah Sistani is sitting in that one corner on that L-shaped couches that are sitting there, and you go and you sit next to him and you speak to him. The difference will be, of course, that usually Ayatollah Sistani doesn't get up, given his age. Of course, he's over 90 years old now, and some of the medical conditions. He just remains seated, and people come, and of course, before pandemic, you would go and you would be able to get close to him, kiss his hand and whatnot, and sit down next to him. But because of that, he would remain seated, and of course, because of the security. But because Pope is arriving, the difference will be, as what I have heard in the details, that Ayatollah Sistani will actually stand up from his place, go and greet the Pope at the door, and accompany him to the place where they will sit down, and they'll have this conversation for what is known to be about 40 minutes long conversation and now what they'll discuss, of course, it will be made public later on, but the impact that it'll have, I think we can see as it is. There's a lot of hype about it in the Muslim world, especially the Shia world, not so much in the Christian world. I don't know how much they are talking about it, even if they know that something like this is happening. I guess that also shows you the connection that people have with their leaders and their authority. So because of our connection with our marja is such that we know this is happening and it's historic, and because it's happening in our home ground, that's also something which makes it that much important. So it is an important time for people to come to know. Maybe this way people will realize that there's a religion which is, talks about peace and love, and it stands for peace and love. And therefore there's a possibility of coexisting as we have done so. So these are, important events. I think using the word caching is not right, but using this opportunity to inform your Christian counterparts about what is happening, because this will be hopefully covered by the international media, and this will give you, headways into, talking about these points, that as to how these two great leaders are coming together, and similarly, you and I can also come together, putting aside our differences. So I think this is a very historical event. All the interfaith or intrafaith things that we have done, interfaith in this regards, that we do this at a smaller scale, bringing the local Christians and Jews and other religious bodies together in masjid to have a dialogue with them, only focusing on points that are common to us. But this is as mega as it gets of an interfaith event. So there's nothing bigger than the interfaith event, where the topmost authorities in either religion is going to be sitting together. So with that said, it is important for us to pay special and close attention to what transpires and how we're able to relate this message to others. The segment that I chose for today's discussion is from Nahj al-Balagha. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Muttaqeen Ali ibn Abi Talib said about Muttaqeen, if his self refuses to endure a thing which it does not like, he does not grant its request towards what it likes. Now, of course, the words of Imam are at the peak of eloquence. So the translation sometimes does not do the justice. So I'll try my best to go ahead and decipher this. The coolness of his eyes lies in what is to last forever. So he's only attracted, muttaqi, to that which is forever, not temporary. So that's how you look at that. While from the things of this world that will not last, he keeps himself away from those things. So that portion is very simple to understand. So the elements of awakening, we look at that a lot of time, there's so many elements of negligence. There are so many things that can take you towards negativity. There are only a handful that'll bring you towards positivity or towards awakening. One of those things, which might seem like a negative event, but actually has what in it? Has positivity in it for you. Now, I'm not going into philosophical discussions of how sometimes people say, well, look at the half glass empty and half glass full. Depends on how you perceive things. If you're negative, you're going to say, well, it's half empty. If you're, a positive, for example, is half full. This is a different way of looking at it. But a lot of time, there are certain events that we all will agree that are definitely not positive events. But there you can still derive positivity out of them. And that actually is the matter of awakening, which Imam is pointing out. For example, painful incidents of life. Every one of us have gone through, depends on different scales, painful events in our life. Whether it be in the form of losing a loved one, whether it be in the form of losing your livelihood, or any sort of loss associated with yourself or with your loved ones, or different ups and downs in the life. I'm sure everybody has gone through those things. And some people come out of those ebbs and flows. Some people never come out of those ebbs and flows. For some people, it prolongs for a long time. Allah tests the limit. And for some people, it's only temporary and for time being. So with that said, these painful incidents of life, one of the philosophies behind the unpleasant incidents and severe turmoil in life is to bring us out of negligence. So how's that possible? We all agree that the painful incidents are a negative vibe in our lives. Something which is, everyone will agree that that was a very painful patch in my life. Each one of us will have those patches. We don't want to go back to those. So that the understanding of it being a negative impact in your life is understood. Every single one of us will agree upon that. But what Imam is trying to derive from this negative experience of your life is what? The positivity. That while it was painful, there was severe turmoil associated with it, but that could be used to bring us out of negligence. You can use that painful incident of your life and turn it around and look at it from that positive aspect where it could make an impact in your life. How? One, that you don't repeat that if it was in your hands, for example. Second, you learn from that sour experience that how it is to be in that situation. So not only you feel pain for yourself, but if you see someone else in the similar situation, you can relate to them. That I've been there, I've done that, I've gone through all of that, and I know how you feel about it. So there are many ways of looking at that incident. So these incidents act as speed breakers. You have these bumps on the roads that when you're driving, especially in smaller roads within the communities where the speed limit is 25 miles an hour, they don't want you going faster than that because their kids might be playing. So you have these speed bumps, or we call them back home speed breakers. They basically break your speed, right? So they're speed bumps. They keep you from going too fast. So these speed bumps on a road do what? Keep us on alert. A straight highway without many turns could be what? Devastating than the one which has many turns on it. So, sometimes you're driving down a highway, you're driving on turnpike, a straight highway, and there's, very few cars on it. You get, carried away, you drive a little bit too fast. And because of the similar scenery that comes as far as this highway is concerned, could be devastating for you. While you say, well, it is a very smooth driving, There are no hurdles on the way. There are no traffic lights. There are no bumps. But that could actually be more devastating than a smaller highway or a smaller street with a lot of speed bumps on the way and traffic lights on the way. That could save your life, and that could be more devastating. That's why you have more accidents happening on a highway than you have accidents that are happening on a smaller road. Similarly, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and other heart-wrenching events that we have all witnessed in our lives. Sometimes, directly or sometimes indirectly. Sometimes it impacted us because we lived in the place where these incidents happened, or where some of our loved ones lived where these incidents happened. I think this pandemic could also serve as that, incident in our lives, painful incident in our life, which is actually still going on, where we can all see that sometimes some of us were impacted directly by it, or indirectly by it, where so many of our loved ones were impacted. So from this perspective, these incidents are in fact favors by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do you look at something like a volcano, which is there to destroy that anything gets in its path? A flood, which is to wipe away everything that gets in the path. A hurricane, tornado, or other, earthquakes, for example, which devastates. How could these be looked as the favors of Allah? Despite the fact that they might be harmful and destructive at times, but once you go through that painful experience, what it brings to you, it brings a new understanding to you. This pandemic is a prime example for that. Last year around this time, in March, not many of us were taking it very seriously because it hadn't really impacted us. The cases in China were at this point last year were about 80,000 cases. And I don't know what the numbers are still there truly, but that actually only went up to 85,000 in a whole year. Maybe they stopped counting. But last year around this time, the cases were already up to 80,000 in China. Well, we only had maybe 4 or 5 cases in the United States last year around this time. February, I think February 21st was the first case. And then in March, you had a few other cases, sporadic, 4 or 5 cases altogether in all of the United States. Where do we stand at now? About 25 million cases. And then 500,000 deaths, for example. So nobody really imagined that. It is a painful, difficult time, especially for those who lost loved ones. How many loved ones have we lost? We've been carrying out the bodies and burying our friends and family members, those who lost battle to this COVID-19. So that's a painful experience for all of us. So we could easily relate that once this is all over, because everybody's hoping and praying that it is over, and we see the signs of it coming to an end, if everything goes smoothly as far as the vaccine is concerned and it works how it's supposed to work, and the impact of lowering and having the community herd of majority being vaccinated, where this virus does not spread more, some of us are hoping that we can come back to the masajid to have our programs on regular basis. Some of us are hoping that we can resume our workplaces in the same way. Some of us are hoping that the businesses that closed down can reopen in their full capacity. Different people are having different, some of us are thinking that we can travel freely without having to think about it twice and getting tested and doing this and doing that, and then getting on the airplane. How many of our travel plans were canceled in that last 1 year? Maybe you wanted to go to Hajj, you couldn't go last year. Maybe you wanted to go to Ziyad, you couldn't go last year. Maybe you wanted to go back home, you couldn't go last year. So all of these plans had to be altered. So while it was a very painful, severe turmoil, negative impact it had on all of our lives, but we lived through it to see the brighter side of it, and that gives us hope, and that gives us ability. Last year, March, we were all vulnerable. This year, March, we feel much better about ourselves because we're able to cope with this virus now. We're able to overcome this virus. And sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So number one is the painful incidents of life. I don't know, I'll be able to get through all of this, but number one element is of awakening is the painful incidents. So you look at all these painful incidents that have happened in your life personally or at large, and you get a message from it. Number two is studying the history of the previous nations. History is very important from that aspect. If it wasn't for history, many of the things that we avoid it, we would not have been able to avoid. Because we saw previous people did this, we're no longer doing it. And because it was something which they did and turned out to be wrong. And don't have to go 1,000 years back or 2,000 years back in the history, although that history is equally important. You can just go back in history, maybe 5 years and back, or 10 years or 20 years ago. Things that you saw personally from someone, and that's where the tarbiyat also comes in. As parents, we grow up, we've seen things, and this is where we impart this knowledge to our children so that they don't make the same mistake. Sometimes the children might make fun of their older fathers and their elderly, their older brothers and their siblings. What do you know? This is the fast moving world and you probably have no idea. Well, they've seen, because at that time when they were living, it was a fast moving world as well. Yeah, there were different things that they had to tackle, but the experience is something which cannot be undermined. So therefore, that is why a Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ash-shaykhu fi baytihi kan-nabi fi ummatihi." An elderly in the house is like a prophet in his nation. Prophet in the nation is what? Prophet in the nation is there to guide them. Prophet might be subject to ridicule, subject to mocking, as people did in the time of Rasulullah. They used to mock him. Go back to the time of Hazrat Noah. They used to mock him for building an ark. They used to mock Rasulullah as well for what he was doing. But his presence was there as a wujud. His wujud was to provide mercy and love and guide people. Rasulullah compared the wujud of a Nabi in the entire ummah and the job of a Nabi in the entire ummah to what? An elderly in the house. That when you have an elderly in the house, they may not be physically able to do anything for you, but their rich experience can guide you through the difficult times. So that for the elderly must also realize that their experience is valuable to their children. Therefore, they only give that which is of the purity, with ikhlas, with khulus. So that is the second thing, is to study the history of the previous nations, reading the history of the previous nation and their remnants and the ruins. There's so many places in the Quran. It says, "Siru fil ardi فَيَنْظُرُ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُتَّقِينَ," or مُكَذِّبِينَ or مُجْرِمِينَ. Travel in the land and see what was the end of those who were mukazzibin, those who were liars, those who were criminals, because you will learn for what they did. So therefore, hanging gardens of Babel and the other wonders of the world, inhabitants of these places are supplicants of history. If we pay attention, we can see that they are not quite they are rather very vocal for our sake. They're not just sitting there idly and they're quiet. You go to a wonder of the world, for example, you go to Ihram in Misr, and you see that these mountains like places that were built so many years ago, they're quiet, but they're speaking. They're very vocal if you were to able to get out of what they're trying to say to you. The hanging gardens or other wonders of the world and the other ruins of the world, you go there, they're speaking to you. But of course, you and I need that insight to understand what they are saying to us. So therefore, these are the two things that I shared with you. Unfortunately, I was not able to get to the other parts of this khutbah. Hopefully, we will get to it at another time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq and ability to look at the negative events in our lives, and so we're able to turn them into positive by learning and lessons from them. They become ibrat for us so that we are able to transfer this to others so that they stay away from what we have gone through. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this historic meeting that is taking place between Ayatollah Sistani and Pope goes, in all, hopefully without any hurdles, and goes smoothly, and something important and rich and beneficial comes out of this gathering. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our awaited Imam, make us amongst the helpers and the soldiers of Imam. Nahsan al-Hadith, wa ablagh al-mawidha kitab Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحليم الكريم غافر الذنب وقابل التوب وهو الغفور الرحيم سبحان من سبقت رحمته وغضبه وسط الرحمة سبقت رحمته وغضبه وسط اليدين بالرحمة سبحان من لم يكلف نفسا إلا دون وسعها وعفان السيئات ولم يجاز بها سبحان من لا يزداد ولا مازل لبعد إلا كرما وجودا ولا كثرة الذنوب إلا عفوا وصفا نشهد أن لا إله إلا هو لا توصل لبعد بجود ولا قاد المظلمين بحلمه ونشهد أن محمدا نبيه وحبيبه سيد المرسلين وشفي المظلمين بعثه رحمة للعالمين لقد أمركم الله في محكم كتابه بالصلاة على نبيه وحبيبه فقال تعليما لكم وتشريفا للصفي إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وعلى إمام المسلمين وقائد الغر المحجلين أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى سيدة نساء العالمين وبذة خاتم النبيين سيدتنا فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلوات الله عليها وعلى الحسن المجتبى والحسين الشهيد بكربلاء وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي عليهم الصلاة والسلام اللهم صل على مولانا صاحب الزمان ما هي آثار البدع والطغيان هادم أبنية الشرك والنفاق قاصد فروع البغي والشقاق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى عباد الكرام اتصلت الليالي والأيام اللهم عجل فرجا وسهل مخرجا واكحل ناظرنا بنظرة منا إليه واجعلنا من المستشهدين بين يديه وتفضل الأمراء المؤمنين بمزيد التوفيقات وازدياد الإقبال وعلو بالدرجات اللهم افعل بنا ما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بنا ما نحن أهل بجاه محمد وآله المعصومين صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين اللهم اجعلنا ممن يذكر فتنفعه الذكر إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون